Hello and welcome to this High Streets Task Force online learning session about the principles of town planning in relation to high streets and town centres, hosted by me, Stefano Smith. I am a High Streets Task Force expert and facilitator, board trustee and fellow of the Royal Town Planning Institute and founding director of Stefano Smith Planning. Stefano Smith Planning is a planning consultancy established in 2019 with over 30 years' experience advising public, private and third sectors in statutory planning, including approvals and consents and expert witness, town centres and high street regeneration, placemaking, master planning and urban design, consultation and engagement strategies and tools, and development viability, as well as the use of appraisal and assessment tools. The main aims of this online learning session are threefold. Firstly, to enable learners to understand the basic concepts within the specialist field of town planning. Secondly, to outline some of the main challenges experienced by the planning process and consultation. How are plans made? What are the different types of formal plans in relation to high streets? What difference will recent measures make? And thirdly, to briefly describe the move towards inclusive planning, engaging communities in a meaningful way and addressing strategic planning issues, including the future high street, infrastructure, climate change, sustainability, housing, resilience, with examples of good practice and further reading. This online learning session is divided into three main parts. Part 1 will outline the history and development of planning practice in the UK. Part 2 will describe the planning process and consultation. And Part 3 will describe the future balance of our high streets and town centres, including examples of good practice and further reading. By the end of this online learning session, you will have an understanding of the basic principles and concepts of town planning in relation to high streets and town centres, a stronger appreciation of the main challenges to the high street from the town planning perspective, and access to examples of good practice which will help you to formulate solutions to specific local problems in relation to high streets and revitalisation, linking where appropriate to relevant task force datasets, tools, best practice guides, diagnostics and repository information. So firstly, why plan? Why is town planning important and how can it help change the world around us for the better? Imagine what kinds of buildings and local amenities your local area, neighbourhood needs. You might have thought about homes, offices, shops, restaurants. What about infrastructure, such as the roads and railways, and the parks, schools and hospitals? How should they be planned and where should they all go? According to Professor Cliff Haig, today there are 180,000 more people living in urban areas than there were yesterday. There will be another 180,000 there when you wake up tomorrow, and another 180,000 the day after that. Rapid urbanisation will have a huge impact on our built environment, how we live, work and play. From a planning perspective, how we set out new buildings and streets and the urban form, how we improve public health and living conditions, how we travel and access jobs, leisure, retail and recreation opportunities in a sustainable way, all generate environmental, climate and social impacts and are all relevant to our high streets and town centres. Planners are interested in people, places and sustainability. A town planner helps find the solution to these issues. As a professional activity, town planning balances the social, economic and environmental needs of urban and rural areas. In 1947, the government nationalised the development and use of land and created a comprehensive planning system via a Town and Country Planning Act. These laws were fundamental in laying the foundations for the planning system that exists today, setting many of the overall principles on how and why to plan. Planners are still required to write policies to promote or restrict where buildings should go, and make decisions on applications for development, including town centres and high streets. The turn of the 21st century saw a new focus on spatial planning and sustainability. This was in response to further expanding populations, rapid urbanisation and the impact of greenhouse gases, with environmental concerns gaining political prominence. Planners therefore today face the continual challenge of maintaining a balance between managing development to support new housing, jobs and retail, while looking after the environment for the long term. The principle of the UK planning system is that it is the management, control and regulation of development, balancing public and private development needs with the protection of amenity and the environment in the wider public interest. The basis of the UK's planning systems in England and the devolved nations of Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland is discretionary planning. As can be seen in this slide, discretionary planning comprises of three key elements. The planning authority prepares a development plan outlining a positive vision for the future of their area and a framework for addressing economic, social and environmental priorities, including town centres and retailing. Represented by elected councillors, the planning authority decides on planning applications, unless called in, for example, by the Secretary of State in England, in accordance with the development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise, providing flexibility. And planning appeals are determined independently, for example, by the Planning Inspectorate in England and Wales, or the DPEA in Scotland, all relevant to high streets and town centres. A planner's main aim is achieving sustainability. This means balancing different social, environmental and economic issues when official decisions are made on whether a piece of land is built on or not. Another way to describe this job is making places, or commonly referred to as placemaking, such as towns, including town centres and high streets, for people to live, work and play. Planners do not construct buildings, but recommend how and where buildings should be built, what they should be used for, and how they should fit into the local surroundings. RTPI's About Planning Guide gives you a taster of what planners can do. Part 2 of this session will outline the planning process and consultation and is divided into 4 main sections. Firstly, Section A will deal with policy. Secondly, Section B will deal with development management. Thirdly, Section C will consider consultation. And finally, Section D will address placemaking. Plan making in England begins at the national level with the National Planning Policy Framework. NPPF was first published in March 2012 and last updated in June 2019. It sets the national agenda, guides and informs local development plan policy, is a material consideration in decision making, and establishes the presumption in favour of sustainable development. And from a high streets and town centres perspective, aims to ensure the vitality of town centres. In terms of relevant town centre policies, NPPF states that planning policies should A. Define a network and hierarchy of town centres and promote their long-term vitality and viability by allowing them to grow and diversify in a way that can respond to rapid changes in the retail and leisure industries, allows a suitable mix of uses, including housing, and reflects their distinctive characters. B. Define the extent of town centres and primary shopping areas and make clear the range of uses permitted in such locations as part of a positive strategy for the future of each centre. C. Retain and enhance existing markets and where appropriate reintroduce or create new ones. D. Allocate a range of suitable sites in town centres to meet the scale and type of development likely to be needed, looking at least 10 years ahead. Meeting anticipated needs for retail, leisure, office and other main town centre uses over this period should not be compromised by a limited site availability, so town centre boundaries should be kept under review where necessary. E. Where suitable and viable town centre sites are not available for main town centre uses, allocate appropriate edge of centre sites that are well connected to the town centre. If sufficient edge of centre sites cannot be found, policies should explain how identified needs can be met in other accessible locations that are well located to the town centre. And F. Recognise that residential development often plays an important role in ensuring the vitality of centres and encourage residential development on appropriate sites. A development plan is the statutory requirement across the UK. It sets out the development requirements for an area and details the strategies and policies in which subsequent planning applications are to be considered and determined, including applications affecting town centres and high streets. The development plan is subject to regular monitoring and review and must involve key stakeholders and the local community. This applies to all nations and regions, although, as we will see in the next few slides, there are variations in the strategy and policy themes amongst the devolved planning administrations of Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, particularly in relation to the town centre and high streets. Planning Policy Wales, PPW Edition 11, published in February 2021, sets out the land use planning policies of the Welsh Government. It is supplemented by a series of technical advice notes, Welsh Government circulars and policy clarification letters, which together with PPW provide the national planning policy framework for Wales. The primary objective of PPW is to ensure that the planning system contributes towards the delivery of sustainable development and improves the social, economic, environmental and cultural well-being of Wales as required by the Planning Wales Act 2015, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act 2015 and other key legislation and resultant duties such as the socio-economic duty. A well-functioning planning system is fundamental for sustainable development and achieving sustainable places, including town centres and high streets. The Welsh Government identifies a number of overarching objectives for retail and commercial centres, which planning authorities should aim to deliver through their development plan and development management decisions, ensuring their maximum contribution to the well-being goals. The planning system must promote viable urban and rural retail and commercial centres as the most suitable locations to live, work, shop, socialise and conduct business. Sustain and enhance retail and commercial centres' vibrancy, viability and attractiveness, and improve access to and within retail and commercial centres by all modes of transport, prioritising walking, cycling and public transport. The Welsh Government operates a Town Centres First policy in relation to the location of new retail and commercial centre development. The Planning Scotland Act 2019 has elevated the status of the national planning framework to that of the development plan. The NPF is now to incorporate Scottish planning policy. The draft 4th National Planning Framework is a long-term plan for Scotland that sets out where development and infrastructure is needed to support sustainable and inclusive growth. Consultation on the proposed revised framework is likely to take place from the autumn 2021. The Scottish Government will seek to broaden the mix of uses in town centres in the future. As part of this, they will look at how the policies can help to deliver the town centre first principle and associated work on regeneration as a key contributor to achieving a new emphasis on localism and sustainability. Also, to promote new opportunities to increase town centre living, for example, by stimulating the reuse of empty properties and gap sites, and actively promoting homes for people of all ages, with greater recognition of the contribution these can make to housing requirements. And also to look at how policies can respond to current and future expected changes to the retail sector, and harness the energy of the cultural heritage, historic environment and arts economy, including the evening night-time economy, to support town centre regeneration. The Strategic Planning Policy Statement sets out the Department for Infrastructure's regional planning policies for securing the orderly and consistent development of land in Northern Ireland under the reformed two-tier planning system. The provisions of the SPPS must be taken into account in the preparation of local development plans and are also material to all decisions on individual planning applications and appeals. The Department of the Environment Northern Ireland aims that town centres are important hubs for a range of land uses and activities and can have a positive impact on those who live, work and visit them. They provide a wide variety of retailing and related facilities, including employment, leisure and cultural uses. The town's high streets also play an important role in bringing people together and can foster a sense of community and place. The Regional Development Strategy 2035 recognises the importance of accessible, vibrant city and town centres which offer people more local choice for shopping, social activity and recreation. The regional strategic objectives for town centres and retailing are to secure a town centre first approach for the location of future retailing and other main town centre uses, and adopt a sequential approach to the identification of retail and main town centre uses in local development plans and when decision taking. The primacy of the development plan has been with us for some time. This is expanded differently between the various nations, England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. For example, in England and Wales, through Section 38 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004, which states, if regard is to be had to the development plan for the purpose of any determination to be made under the Planning Acts, the determination is to be made in accordance with the plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Primacy of the development plan depends on it being up to date and in line with national policy. This applies across all nations and regions. So what is a material planning consideration that has the ability to overturn the development plan? In short, it is relevant elements of policy, national, regional and local, the views of consultees and factors on the ground. In terms of consultees, there are statutory and non-statutory consultees. The Council is a non-statutory consultee, but its views and those of local residents are always considered, but local opposition or support on its own is not a reason for refusing or granting planning permission. Opposition or support must be backed up by valid planning reasons. Whether or not a factor is capable of being a material planning consideration is a matter of law. Beyond that, it is a matter of fact whether a fact capable of being a material consideration is a material consideration in any particular case. Once the existence of the material consideration is established, the weight given to it in the eventual decision is a matter of judgment for the local planning authority. In responding to planning applications submitted in the Council's area, it is important to differentiate between material and non-material considerations. In short, the former can legitimately be considered and the latter cannot. This section considers the importance of consultation in the planning process. Post-war redevelopment led to the construction of new roads and a rise in the use of cars, with consequential impacts on environmental, social and economic matters. These issues raise questions about a community's desire for and involvement in the planning process, which still remains a key tenet of the planning system today. The Skeffington Committee was appointed in 1968 to assess how the public might become more involved in the creation of local development plans in response to the concerns that planning was unpopular with many members of the public. In 1969, the government commissioned and published the Skeffington Report on public participation in planning. The same year, the Queen formally recognised the role of planners by granting a royal charter to the Royal Town Planning Institute to advance the science and art of town planning. Following these changes, professional planners were tasked to produce county and regional structure plans to coordinate planning decisions locally, and legislation on local plans was updated with the Town and Country Planning Act in 1990. While the planning system has undergone other changes in different parts of the UK since then, the main tenet of public consultation remains. 50 years on, and public engagement in planning is not only a statutory requirement, but is also a cornerstone and a golden thread that runs through the evolution and transformation of planning. For example, with the use of digital technology, people now hear about plans on the web, can sometimes view 3D models of new proposals, and will then submit comments online. The methods of engagement with communities and the public, as well as consultation techniques, have developed considerably over time. The RTPI, in partnership with Grayling Engage, produced research on the future of engagement published in December 2020. It was based on the driving principle that the ability to engage with local communities is essential to ensuring the projects that are key to the country's recovery are not stalled, including retail projects that impact on city, town centres and high streets. I would recommend looking at this research in further detail in your own time. Some of the contextual evidence for the research in terms of what the industry and the community said about the current state of engagement is shown in this infographic. For example, the pandemic accelerated a shift to greater use of digital engagement, but some found it easier to adapt than others. 83% of survey respondents stated that they have changed the way their organization delivers consultation activity. Digital engagement has been legitimized in the eyes of the public and decision makers. Nearly half, 46%, of those surveyed stated that the expectations of decision making with both local authorities and the public had changed, with most citing the shift to an acceptance of online tools as reasons for this change. And most people are willing to get involved in local decision making. 1 in 4 respondents, 28%, took part in a consultation and engagement activity over the past 12 months, but a much bigger proportion, 63%, feel they could be motivated to participate in the future. The next 2 slides outline the 10 recommendations in the Future of Engagement research report. I would recommend following the link to the research report in the earlier slide and take time to properly consider these recommendations, especially if consultation is an issue or of particular interest. This slide, prepared by the High Streets Task Force, illustrates the range of potential town centre high street stakeholders to be consulted and their sphere of influence in terms of degree of formality and source of funding. For example, formal privately funded stakeholders in the top right quadrant include business improvement districts compared with town teams, which are informal, publicly funded stakeholders in the bottom left quadrant. This section considers the influence of placemaking with a particular focus on the 20-minute neighbourhood concept upon town centre high street planning and regeneration. Plan Melbourne 2017 to 2050 is the Victorian Government's long-term planning strategy guiding the way the city will grow and change to 2050. Plan Melbourne is supported by the principle of 20-minute neighbourhoods. The 20-minute neighbourhood is all about living locally, giving people the ability to meet most of their daily needs within a 20-minute return walk from home with access to safe cycling and local transport options. These connected and walkable places are where people can live, work and play, buy their bread and milk in their local neighbourhood high street, work from home or local business, access services and meet their neighbours at the central gathering places. The places people live have a direct impact on their health by creating well-designed, walkable neighbourhoods that are connected through a mix of land uses, housing types and access to quality public transport can create more healthy, livable communities, town centres, high streets and neighbourhoods. Part 3 of this online training session is divided into 3 main sections. Section A is the consideration of the future balance of town centres and high streets. Section B outlines some examples of good practice in terms of planning high streets and town centres, and Section C suggests some examples of recent exemplary further reading. In terms of the future balance of town centres and high streets, this can be considered in terms of short, medium and long-term impacts. There are short to medium-term impacts where we have real evidence, and long-term structural change affecting high streets and town centres. The pandemic may have slowed some, or in the case of online shopping, accelerated them, but lockdown and subsequent recovery may also be producing new conditions. To help understand all this, there are perhaps 3 salient themes which we can use to organise the evidence and make more sense of the impact of the pandemic. Travel mobility in general has been significantly reduced. Pandemic revealed existing structural inequalities and change in societal attitudes towards work, shopping and environment. You may wish to reorganize the complexity of this slide in your own time into something a little more meaningful, perhaps as a basis for reinforced learning or discussion among your network about the future of high streets, and in doing so, Add a little more food for thought. Also in this slide, you may wish to take time to arrange these images into three main groups. Firstly, placemaking ingredients of new town centres and high streets. Secondly, principles and issues. And thirdly, emerging trends. As you look to the future, there are other changes that will have a significant impact on your town centre. We need to plan now for the future with fewer cars. Parking requirements will fall, as is happening across Europe. Car space should be given to people for walking, cycling, events, recreation, or just being. The health benefits and benefit to the planet will be enormous. COVID has pushed forward public realm changes in many locations, and these need to be part of designing the future of our town centres. This section considers three examples of good practice. The first case study is a project carried out between January and July 2021 on the future of the High Street. The project was funded by the Scottish Funding Council and delivered by the Edinburgh Futures Institute and Edinburgh Living Lab, in collaboration with the Data-Driven Innovation Programme and New Practice Architects. The aim of the Future of the High Street project is to better understand key high street challenges and opportunities and pilot two small-scale tweaks in two project locations, Gorgie Del Rye in Edinburgh and Dalkeith in Midlothian, with potential to support the High Street as a successful, vibrant and livable place as we emerge from COVID. The approach adopted combines citizen engagement and co-design with rapid prototyping, urban data and research. I recommend following the link included in this slide and take the opportunity of exploring the approach, methodology, tools and outcomes adopted by this research to potentially inform some of your own thinking and town centre high street issues challenges. This second case study is the regeneration project from Wokingham Town Centre, undertaken by Wokingham Borough Council. It was named as the winner in the category for Excellence in Planning for a Successful Economy at the Royal Town Planning Institute Awards for Planning Excellence in 2020. This project was ahead of the game, a transferable model for other town centres to boost their economies and community engagement during the coronavirus pandemic. A period challenging us all to think about what is important in our lives and the lives of those around us, the local places and spaces around us, the way that we work, use our homes, town centres and high streets, and communicate with others. The council had a very hands-on approach in revitalising the town centre by taking a whole place approach, which positioned all involved for success. This approach is not only innovative, but replicable throughout the country. Their financial model especially will have a long-lasting contribution to creating a successful economy in the future. Again, I'd encourage you to follow the link if you're interested in understanding how this learning can potentially benefit your own town centre and high street experience. This final case study looks at the Darlington Business Improvement District, Distinct Darlington. The Darlington bid was in response to Darlington Town Centre facing increasing competition as a retail leisure destination from neighbouring towns and cities, from out-of-town retail parks and from online shopping. For Darlington Town Centre to remain competitive, there was a need to promote and improve the town, attract more visitors and shoppers and encourage them to stay longer and spend more. The outcome was the creation of a unique sense of place. In April 2012, the District Darlington bid was successful at ballot. By working in partnership and recognising that a strong marketing campaign would help the new town to compete more effectively with neighbouring destinations, the interim board demonstrated a positive and professional approach to securing Darlington's future. The final section of Part 3 looks at the following two recommended pieces of further reading. Firstly, The Future of Towns, prepared by Demos and published in December 2020, and A New Future for Scottish Town Centres, prepared by the Town Centre Action Review Group and published in February 2021. The aim is to consolidate your understanding of the principles of town planning in relation to the future of our towns and high streets, and perhaps encourage you to read and explore further literature. The future of towns was prepared in the context of the government wanting to build back better after COVID-19. Central to these plans are a desire to level up the country's economy with a particular focus on towns. However, this Demos research with KPMG finds that towns are split down the middle over whether they want change. The future for towns seems even more uncertain now than it did before the COVID pandemic. The pandemic poses existential risks to local businesses in towns across the country, some of which are the lifeblood of their local communities. On the other hand, a shift towards remote working, together with the promise of large-scale investment in towns as part of the government's levelling up agenda, could be a once-in-a-generation opportunity for towns. The research shows that towns are complex and largely misunderstood, with the same patterns in attitudes consistent across all types of towns in England, from ex-industrial towns to affluent towns. The report's recommendations include that town leaders to engage their residents and local business leaders in an open, participatory conversation about the future of the high street, ex-industrial towns to be a priority for investment, and central government investment in towns to be conditional on buy-in from the local community and business leaders. In terms of the second recommended reading, A New Future for Scotland's Town Centres, the aim of the review was to strengthen the position of town centres overall and ensure a local embeddedness and focus on working with all of the local community. It was recognised that towns and town centres are unique places and have their individual specific localities and communities to consider. The three types of recommendations are: Recommendation 1, strengthen the formal position of towns and town centres in national planning, including requirements to produce town and town centre plans, co-produced with communities, and enhanced data collection and use at the town and town centre level. Recommendation 2, that Scottish Government should review the current tax, funding and development systems to ensure that well-being, economy and climate outcomes, fairness and equality are at their heart. And the third recommendation, expand and align funding of demonstration projects in towns and town centres. The overall request is that the Scottish Government continues to seek to expand and ensure further alignment of the funding available. Funding for town centre activities has to be substantial, multi-year, and cover revenue and capital spend. Valuable resources and contacts can be found on the High Streets Task Force website, including datasets, tools, best practice guides, diagnostics, and a repository of information. Similarly, specific resources and contacts in relation to town planning, such as policy and research, planning practice, and planning and political networks, can be found on the Royal Town Planning Institute's website. Useful High Streets Task Force and RTPI contacts, including relevant social media handles, can be found in this table. Thank you for interacting with this High Streets Task Force online training resource prepared by me, Stefano Smith of Stefano Smith Planning, on behalf of the RTPI. Hopefully you found this resource of value as well as thought-provoking, with good signposts and links to enable you to further develop your understanding of the principles of town planning and its influence and impact on high streets and town centres.